Hello, my name is Emmanuel Wa-Kyendo. I'm a economic policy analyst, and I've got some questions. Now, today's question is, how should swift and small open economies respond to the changing political economy of global payments systems? So, SWIFT is the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. What SWIFT does is they forward messages, right? It's a messaging platform that allows banks to communicate and financial institutions to communicate. Communicate on what? Communicate on the transactions that they are making between each other. So SWIFT does not transfer money across borders, but it does carry the messages bearing instructions and other information about these cross-border payments. Now, the SWIFT is important in this way. The equivalent of the global economy, or just under $100 trillion, passes through the SWIFT system. Now, again, it's not the money itself, but messages about these transactions. So that makes about every day 44 trillion US dollars in messages pass through the SWIFT. SWIFT itself generates about 2 billion euros in revenue a year. The answer, right? So SWIFT, what are the problems that they're facing? SWIFT is facing a challenge by in terms of two types of challenges. The one hand, you have the bifurcation of trade, right? You have the challenge that global trade is bifurcating. You also have the challenge that in addition to this bifurcation, you have the growing demand for global payment systems is also creating opportunities for more other market entrants. This also in addition to the changes in technology. If you can communicate through satellites, through platforms like Starlink, then you can send messages through the Starlink, and then you conversely you can send financial transactions, messages on financial transactions through these platforms, right? So with growing demand from the rest of the world, right, the world outside the Occidental, then you have actually a challenge to SWIFT's place. Now the final challenge is just the kind of indirect or extra legal competition posed by other nation states. Like say if a state actor is pushing messaging against SWIFT, calling SWIFT say an instrument of imperialism. Now that might make customers in certain places of the world less friendly towards SWIFT, right? More suspicious. Now, if governments themselves also take to creating their own SWIFT analogs, right, their own messaging, payment messaging systems, in order to say bypass sanctions, then you have another challenge to SWIFT. So in all this changing global political economy, how should SWIFT respond, and how should small open economies like say Kenya respond? Now, it's incumbent upon SWIFT to recognize the role of classical liberal institutions and multilateralism in the success that they enjoy, and to promote classical liberal institutions across the world. It's possible, for example, to use an instrument like the Index of Economic Freedom with supplementary analyses to determine what investment of effort, if any, they can and should make within a given market. Investments can include coordinating or directing support in the form of partnerships, resources, and networks to establish advanced research by think tanks with a focus on classical liberal thought and its place in determining the integrity and policy posture of institutions. To widen the scope further, The financial intermediaries that use SWIFT should be recruited to help coordinate these efforts. They must be persuaded to recognize that their own success is a result of this very institutional mix, and that they can benefit from investing in vigilance for its safeguarding and in its improvement. So what does that mean in simpler terms? It simply means that if SWIFT decides that they have a problem with a shrinking market in a place like Kenya, well, they have two options, right? They could either coordinate with other firms that hold the same view. If you have decided that you care about the Kenyan market or the African market, support institutions and ideas that build market economies, the kind of economies that generate wealth. Support investments in ideas that can help improve the likelihood of positive outcomes in terms of generating wealth. If you don't do that, the situation you're looking at is that you come to a place like Kenya a couple of years down the line, and you have but only to use, say, unconventional, extra-legal means to secure your market. Like, say, you got to bribe a lawmaker, right? That is the situation that they're looking at. Again, emphasis on if they decide that these markets are important to them, because they might as well decide that they're not. And if they're not, well, don't ask these states to do anything about it then. You're expecting a private good to enjoy some sort of support that other private goods do not, right? I mean, that's one approach that they might be tempted to take. And we say that SWIFT is a private good. It is not a public good, and therefore it's not automatically, from the perspective of economic orthodoxy, right? Economic thinking, it is not deserving of any extra support in that sense, right? Not support that any other private firm is not deserving of. So now what about the societies within small open economies? What should they do? Well, small societies within small open economies need to recognize the emergent quality of economic outcomes that have generated wealth, and then work to supply good ideas and engage the public sector in support of and advocating for these classical liberal ideas. Right? You can throw in your mix of pragmatism if you find that, but from an economic standpoint, this is what should be promoted. Civil society and private firms can provide support for research and dissemination of ideas built on classical liberal thought, with the faith that the establishment of these institutions will be sufficient to advance the welfare of citizens. Furthermore, both SWIFT and the societies of small open economies should consider that China has made explicit its opposition to classical liberal institutions and its intention to stand against their proliferation anywhere around the world. Now that's their idea, right? And you could say, that's their perspective. What you have to reckon with as a citizen of a small open economy like Kenya is to say, what did we choose in our constitution? Does the policy posture of another nation pose a sort of challenge or a threat to our chosen way of life? Well, it's then our responsibility to safeguard against it. It's nobody else's. You just have to take the measures necessary at each step, from the granular to the macro level. If the Chinese Communist Party has decided to erode this institutional mix wherever it can, that's their perspective. Just like every other nation wants to influence other nations in the direction that they want to go, you don't have to assign to it some sort of a demonization. You just have to ask whether it goes with or against your interests, or you change your interests accordingly, by changing your constitution. That is an option available to the body of citizens. So finally, because SWIFT is not a public good, it is not within any state's purview to provide explicit support to it. Rather, it is incumbent upon society to influence the development of these institutions that can provide a regulatory atmosphere that is inimical to the erosion of private enterprise. So, let me show a logo of Swift so that you can sort of identify this firm and can sort of see what we're talking about. The Swift, based in Brussels. Or do we need a logo? Maybe not. Maybe not. But that's the answer to today's question. Thank you. And have a good day. Remember, the final point is this. It's not become apparent enough to citizens of many African countries, and especially middle class, the elite, those who are educated enough that they can actually train their minds onto the legislative process of the respective countries. So they can understand, if you're trained in finance, you can understand the state of your nation's public finances. You understand the law, then you can train your mind onto the interpreting legislation. Economics. You can train your economic knowledge onto the problem of our economic policy and actually interrogate it. In a place like Kenya, where you have the freedom, if this is not happening, you are not doing this, you are wasting the opportunity that the freedom actually provides. Because the important thing is this: it is from the citizen and the pressure inflicted upon the lawmaker by the citizen that decisions get made. If you're not in the game, then decisions are made for you in your name because you voted, but you're not enforcing your mandate. You're not transmitting your decision by remaining involved throughout. And that involvement begins with knowledge, with being informed as a citizen. If this is not happening, you can kiss your nation goodbye, and you will have no right, in a way, to argue when it's gone, because you were not there advocating for to safeguard your institution. And look, whether or not one argues whether another nation has the right to influence your nation and all of that, if they're doing it, they're doing it. And it's your job to build institutions that can take care of you. You can't ask Beijing to take care of you. I mean, you can, but to expect them to listen, they have no incentive. Well, you have to change the incentive structure where you are, where we are. This is true on a continent. And this is true, say, of the African diaspora, who have forgotten. Maybe they interact, the most they do is sending remittances and flying in and partying. They've got to do more than that and become true citizens of the world by becoming engaged as citizens wherever they are for a better world, and saying, look, I have ties of kinship to these nations. What can I do to support positive outcomes, or outcomes that are in line with, say, their constitution or the choices they've made? You've got to get engaged. The age of chalking all state failure up to foreign conspiracies has to end. That's my take. La la la.